Welcome to the next part, the formation of federal organizations in the late 17th century. Articles of Confederation. The Treaty of Paris brought peace and independence to the United States, but with an unstable government. The Second Continental Congress wrote the Articles of Confederation in 1777 to clarify the role of Congress. The Articles created a permanent union, effectively the only federal institution, but with little power to manage its own finances or enforce its resolutions. During the post-war economic crisis, political unrest broke out in some states, and attempts to use the government to cancel the debts of debtors worried leaders. The apparent inability to pay war debts, combined with Congress's inability to be an effective forum for cooperation among the states to promote trade and economic development, further clouded the picture. Constitutional Congress. A number of attempts to organize a movement for reform led Congress to hold a new convention, which opened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1787. Now called the Constitutional Congress of 1787, it was intended simply to propose reforms to the Articles of Confederation, but secretly became a convention to write a new constitution after its first meeting. The resulting constitution called for a federal government, with the following characteristics: limited in scope, independent of the states, superior in certain areas to all states' power to levy taxes, and authority to create an executive branch, a judiciary, and a bicameral legislature. This model of Congress was the main compromise of the convention, because the small states wanted to retain the one state, one vote rule, which they had been given under the Articles of Confederation. The large states wanted the powers of each state based on population and resources. To achieve compromise, the convention decided that the Senate would be where the states would be represented equally, while the House of Representatives would be elected according to the total number of electoral districts with equal population. Thus, populous states would have more electoral districts and representatives than large but sparsely populated states. The language of the Constitution also called for ratification by constitutional conventions in each state, which were specifically appointed to this task. Therefore, the convention sent the Constitution to the states with the request that local constitutional conventions be held. Several of the smaller states, led by Delaware, accepted the draft Constitution without hesitation. But in both New York and Virginia, especially New York, the issue became a hotly contested issue. Virginia, the first British colony to successfully settle North America, was a large state with a large population, a long political tradition, and a leadership that had contributed greatly to the Revolutionary War. New York, in particular, was a large and populous state. With its ports ideally located on the Atlantic coast, it would help determine the future success or failure of the United States. But local political power in New York was firmly in the control of a few long-standing local leaders, with no indication that these would want to share power with national leaders or those who would control the federal government. The New York Constitutional Ratifying Convention thus became the center of heated debates on the subject of charter acceptance. The ratification of the charter. The supporters of the Constitution were known as the Federalists, and they quickly gained popularity throughout the country. The most famous of these men were Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. These three men were the main contributors to the Federalist Papers, a collection of some 85 essays published in New York newspapers at the time. In many ways, these papers are the founding documents of the United States. However, they were written after the Constitutional Convention and were only a small part of the debate in New York. The group that disliked a powerful central government was known as the Anti-Federalists. They feared that a government with the power to levy taxes would quickly become as tyrannical and corrupt as the British colonial government had been decades earlier. The two leading figures in this group were Patrick Henry and George Mason. They were very concerned that the Constitution did not currently include a Bill of Rights. Interestingly, Thomas Jefferson, who was then the American ambassador to France, did not follow either group, but remained neutral and willing to accept either approach. However, he did write from France to his friend and later ally James Madison, expressing his concerns about the draft Constitution. Meanwhile, the Federalists gained a lot of prestige and advantage when General George Washington, then president of the Constitutional Convention, spoke out in support of their position. When Madison promised a Bill of Rights, Virginia agreed to ratify. In New York, the Clintons, who dominated New York politics, also made some concessions to Alexander Hamilton to win ratification at the convention. According to the draft, the federal government would come into effect in the ratifying states once 9 states voted in favor. The Constitution of the United States thus officially came into being when New Hampshire voted yes on June 21, 1788. When Virginia voted yes on June 26th and New York on July 26th, a total of 11 states had ratified the Constitution, including all the largest states. In North Carolina, the ratifying convention ended before a vote could be taken. With a majority of delegates from the non-federalist faction, and chaired by a man who admired Jefferson and thus shared his reservations, the convention decided to postpone ratification. This delay was to last until the new Congress could produce a Bill of Rights, which would amend the Constitution and guarantee certain basic civil rights. Rhode Island, however, did not hold a ratifying convention before the federal government began operating in April 1798. Congress then arranged for the first national election, which resulted in General George Washington being elected president and John Adams being elected vice president. New York City was chosen as the nation's first and temporary capital, and Washington was sworn in there in April 1798 at Federal Hall on the lower Manhattan Peninsula. Under the leadership of James Madison, the first Congress kept its promise of civil rights legislation and proposed 12 amendments to the states. Of these 12 amendments, 10 would be voted on quickly and become the Bill of Rights. 1 would not be ratified, and 1 would be adopted later as the 27th Amendment. Upon hearing of the Bill of Rights passage, North Carolina immediately reconvened the ratifying convention and quickly ratified the Constitution. Rhode Island followed suit and ratified it on May 29, 1790, 1 week before the Bill of Rights was officially enacted. The formation of a pluralistic system. The United States Constitution does not mention political parties, and the Founding Fathers often ridiculed what they called factionalism, a phenomenon common in state governments. However, one can see in the constitutional debates between factions the embryonic formation of a pluralistic system that would later emerge. The Federalists, who had previously advocated the creation of a constitution, became the effective elements in putting the federal government into operation. The non-Federalists, who had no solid organization, quickly disintegrated after the Constitution was born. However, their political views on the concentration of power in the states and the reduction of the power of the central government were still circulated and popular. Their ideas were absorbed into the process of forming a new party, called the Republican Party, or Democratic Republican. This party then always played an opposition role to the Federalists, and took power in 1800 when Thomas Jefferson was elected president. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next